Hush money trial of the former American President Donald Trump has seen heated arguments about whether he violated a gag order issued by the judge that said he was not allowed to publicly attack the witnesses or the jury or the court staff. In the case, Trump is facing charges relating to payments he made to adult movie star Stormy Daniels to remain silent about a relationship or transaction between the two of them before the 2016 presidential election. Simon Marks is the president and chief correspondent of Feature Story News. He's based in Washington. He's here. He's been following the case. Simon, good afternoon to you.
Nice to see you. Nice to
meet you. I mean, in a way, this is all about how Donald Trump sort of behaves. He's been able to break the conventions of sort of American life, American society, and up until now, he's got away with it.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Donald Trump has conducted himself in a manner that most people in the United States never imagined a former president not only would embrace, but would still retain political viability after doing. And that is the extraordinary set of circumstances that America is confronting, because Donald Trump is not just a defendant in this criminal case, the first of potentially four that could play out over the months that lie ahead. He's also the presumed Republican Party's presidential nominee. He's clearly going to be the man who takes on Joe Biden this November. And so now he's stuck in this Manhattan courtroom, potentially for about 6 weeks, we think. The court isn't sitting on Wednesdays, but otherwise he's got to be in New York City for each of the 4 days of the sittings every week, facing criminal charges that theoretically could put him in jail. Very unlikely that as a first-time offender he would receive a custodial sentence if he's convicted, and continuing to behave in pretty much any way that Donald Trump chooses. And as a result of that, you know, the judge has placed several gag orders on Donald Trump over the last few weeks. Trump has steamrolled all of them, completely ignored them, and really the challenge here now is for the court. What's it going to do? Because they have to know at this point, the judge clearly knows at this point, that Donald Trump is not going suddenly to change his behavior.
And it's the strange dynamic, isn't it? And we've seen it here a little bit in some ways, that what you do that gets you into legal trouble can sort of appear to make you almost stronger politically.
Well, of course, Trump's claim throughout is that he is the victim of what he refers to as lawfare. He insists that the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. has been weaponized by President Joe Biden, even though Joe Biden has absolutely nothing to do with this case in New York. It's not a federal case. It's a case being brought by the district attorney in Manhattan, a Democrat. So that plays into Donald Trump's claim that he's being persecuted. And he also says, this is election interference. I should be out now campaigning in the battleground states, those all-important states that sometimes vote Republican, sometimes vote Democratic, always determine the outcome of every election. He says, I should be in Wisconsin, I should be in Pennsylvania, I should be in Michigan. Instead, I'm having to sit here and listen to this relatively low-level criminal case about $130,000 that was paid to, I think we should describe her as former adult film star Stormy Daniels. No question she got the money. The accusation is that Trump falsified business records in order to make that payment to silence her.
You made the point that there are other cases, and I've seen some analysis that suggests, I'm much further away from it than you are, of course, that suggests that in a way this is probably the least serious of these cases.
Yes,
in fact,
definitely.
The other cases are more serious.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. This is generally considered the sort of the runt of the litter. The other three cases, two of them relate to election interference. One is a federal case, the other is being brought by the state of Georgia, and the third case relates to Trump's alleged mishandling of classified documents. That's a federal case. It's being brought in Florida because the alleged mishandling occurred at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. Each of those three cases at the moment is in the legal long grass, partly because Trump very successfully has used his right to lodge a whole series of court motions to try and delay proceedings, but also in the case in Georgia because of a self-inflicted wound by the district attorney in Fulton County, Fani Willis, who brought the case, and who it then emerged was having an affair with a lawyer that she put on the prosecutorial team. Whether any of those cases comes to trial before the November election, I think is now highly in doubt, and it may be that this is the one opportunity that prosecutors have to pin something on Donald Trump before the election campaign really moves into a higher gear.
We're due to have elections 5 weeks from today, and often we see during elections that different parts of our society almost become more divided from each other. The difference in the United States, really, is that it's sort of two divisions, one green, one blue, one red, and that they seem to be almost equal. And that's the astonishing thing about the United States is, you know, people in America tell me that if they go to children's parties, they'll talk about anything except politics.
Oh, I think that's absolutely right. It has become a totally polarized society. I mean, we should point out there is a third-party candidate running, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who ultimately is troubling both campaigns because they worry he could siphon votes away and become the effective kingmaker in this election. But society is brittle, it is polarized. No one imagined that the Republican Party would ever be dragged as far to the right as it has been as a result of Donald Trump's leadership and his popularity among grassroots supporters of his Make America Great Again campaign. But equally, the Democrats are very siloed, listening to their own particular media echo chambers like the Republicans. I mean, I've lived there for 32 years now, Stephen, and it is unrecognizable political terrain from even the way it was, you know, back 20 years ago. It has completely altered to the point where it seems very difficult to imagine that there is a way back to the status quo that used to exist.
Maybe it's time for you to come back. There are also huge divisions on the Middle East. Now, in South Africa, we've seen our government go to the International Court of Justice, and not everyone in South Africa agrees with that. If you had to ask me and sort of say, Stephen, how many South Africans support Gaza, how many people in Gaza, how many South Africans support people in Israel, I'd say it's probably 80–90% in favor of Palestinians, and we see so much happening to people there. So many Palestinians have been killed. In the United States, it's very, very different, a completely different sort of feeling about this. Strong support for Israel, famously, Truman at the time, President Truman, signing sort of documents saying we'll be Israel's ally, recognizing Israel minutes after it became a state, straight after the Second World War. We're seeing now these divisions in American campuses between people who support Palestinians, people who support Israelis, to the point where campuses are being closed.
Yeah, absolutely. And in some ways, I think it is redolent of the campus uprisings that one saw about the apartheid regime, when students were leading the campaign for divestment from South Africa. But it also reflects a shift in the public dynamic in the United States. And I think President Biden has been very surprised by this and didn't expect it. The number of Americans expressing support for Israel, especially under the circumstances of the last several weeks in the Gaza military campaign, has slipped. And you are seeing, particularly among grassroots Democrats, Arab American voters in states like Michigan, vitally important in November, progressive left-wing Democrats and younger Democrats, absolute fury about the amount of rope that they argue Joe Biden has given to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So the situation on campuses is voluble. They are smouldering, several of them, because you are seeing anti-Israel protests on the grounds of many of these campuses. Jewish students, Jewish Americans and other Jewish students from overseas, who say they don't feel safe on those campuses, and university administrators struggling, first of all, to deal with the crisis, and secondly, to figure out how they're going to engage in crisis management, because you've got both Republicans, right-wing Republicans, very, very defensive of the Jewish students and the way they are feeling, and left-wing Democrats, very, very defensive of the right of pro-Palestinian demonstrators to participate in protests. So this is happening in the public arena, in that very polarized world in which we live. And Joe Biden is losing support. It's definitely depressing his performance in the opinion polls to the point where there are Democrats who worry that if he loses in November, it will be as a direct result of the fallout from the events of October the 7th last year, the Hamas invasion of Israel, and the way in which he has handled it subsequently.
And so very quickly, if you can, I mean, there's a lot of talk at the moment about the U.S. as a declining power. But it shows you how important the U.S. still is, that both the conflict in Ukraine and the conflict in Gaza Both pretty much depend on whether the United States supports Ukraine and Israel.
Yeah, I think that's true, but I think there is also a sense that, again, the geopolitical tectonic plates are shifting, and we really saw that with the refusal of Benjamin Netanyahu to accept the American argument that he shouldn't retaliate against Iran after the original tit-for-tat that had taken place, but also in Iran's approach too. I mean, this notion that they don't really seem to worry very much about improving their relationship with the United States. They've built their own alliances now with the Chinese, with the Russians. They feel that they're in a different world and therefore more confident. So things are definitely changing, and many Americans find that very, very difficult to stomach.
Simon Marks, nice to meet you formally. Thank you very much indeed. President Chief Correspondent of Feature Story News. In a moment, in our studio, the CEO of the Road Accident Fund, Collins Letswap. That's